So Calstop, you just got off a customer call, a potential customer call. Let's hear it. Did it go well? Did it go terrible? Did we lose him?
We didn't lose it. We're still talking, which is great.
Okay, good. Welcome to another episode of Someone Analytics. Today, Calstop and I are meeting with Erik Edelmann, the data lead at Hightouch. We're excited about this conversation because Erik has over 10 years experience in the analytics space, ranging from BI analyst to analytics consultant to analytics engineering manager, and most recently, data lead. And unlike previous episodes, Calstop and I don't know Erik personally, so we're really just shooting from the hip and meeting him for the first time. And to add to that, I'm excited to talk with Erik because he was once my competition. I held his position at Hightouch's competitor, Census, and I would constantly benchmark my work against his. I'd usually lose. And now we're no longer competition, and I no longer have to be petty and immature about it. So, Erik, it's great to meet you in person.
Yeah, it's great to have this conversation. Great to meet you as well, and great to be speaking from, not a competitive standpoint.
Great to have you on the show, Erik, and really nice meeting you as well. So to kind of kick things off, I have a very simple question for you. So let's pretend you are eating dinner with your grandpa and he asks you what you do for work. What would you tell him?
Sure, this is always a difficult question, I think, for a lot of data practitioners or really just almost anyone in tech. But I think the way I would answer it is that data is just information. And it's really only useful when it becomes information. So the way I would explain my role is that, information that's in computers is not inherently useful. My job is to make it useful, provide platform systems and processes through which data can go from just, some digital entity in a computer to information somebody can use to make a decision or to kick off something else. So that's the fast way I would explain that to one of my grandparents were I to have to do so.
And let's say you went to dinner again the next week, and this time your grandpa actually tells someone else what you do. What do you think he's going to say?
I think, well, both of my grandpas are pretty different. They both passed away, but I think
Rest in
one would
peace.
say one would say, Erik does something with crunching numbers and computers, and the other would say the same thing, just in Spanish.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, my parents usually just say he does big data, and I usually just nod my head. I'm like, yep, that's it. That's good enough. I don't need to re-explain this. And Erik, let's turn the clock back a little bit. Your first job out of college, I believe, was at WeWork as a BI analyst from like 2014 to 2017, which is really interesting because anybody that watches TV knows about WeWork's story, but you're the first person that I've met that actually worked there and was part of it. So I'm just curious what your experience was like.
Yeah, that's a very fun topic. We could probably spend most of the conversation on that. Yeah, it's been a fun journey since I had that role, and now that I'm doing data at Hightouch, it's just like night and day the types of experiences I'm having now. As compared to what I had in those early days. But what's fun is I ended up in data sort of kind of by accident on purpose. I actually started in physics in college and quickly realized I didn't have big enough brain for that. So just decided to figure out like what my friends were doing. And my rationale was, hey, if people who I like and people whose values I share like this, then it stands to reason I might too. So I kind of got into, business analytics and things like that in college and ended up getting connected with some folks who were interns at WeWork actually between our junior and senior year. And they had all sorts of wild things to say about what it was like interning there in those very early days of that company's, life cycle, which may be drawing to a close. But in those early days, it was very exciting. And so, they said they were learning a ton, having a lot of fun, and it was a great place to build your professional network early in New York. So it sounded like it ticked boxes that it sounded like I should have. So I looked into it and managed to also get an internship there before my senior year, and that was just a blast. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot on the job, and and met a lot of great people. So I decided to go back full time. That experience over those next few years was just, it was amazing in the sense that the first day and the last day were wildly different. When I joined, we were, I think, 250 employees or so, and we were in a small office on Broadway in New York that we shared with a lot of our customers. So it's very, nascent and exciting. Fast forward to when I left, and I think we were like 12,000 or 13,000 employees worldwide or something like that. But being there for that journey was incredible. A lot of learning on the job, a lot of learning together. In terms of the data function, we're just inventing it as we went. We started with just a small team of 2 or 3 data folks who were sort of analyst, engineer, scientist, all of the above wrapped into one, and grew into a more mature team that I think benefited from the early mistakes we made, learned, and became stronger. But none of it was enough to to necessarily change the direction of the company such that it wouldn't fall in some hard times like it has over the last few years. But it was a really fun time. I would say the one thing I would also add to that, outside of just being a data person there, was working there in those early days totally skewed my perspective of what it meant to be just a working professional, because they, as is now known more publicly, were notorious for just how much time and effort they spent on like parties and fun and stuff like that. So it was sort of a weird first job to have because of that. Because after that, I was like, oh, people actually can be serious and get stuff done. So, yeah, very unusual first job.
So I have a follow-on question from there. Like, what would you say was like your biggest learning from that first job that you did, and especially when it was at a company like WeWork? What you took away from that job that you still carry with you today?
I think there are a lot of things I've taken with me from that time. But I think one that comes to mind immediately is that it takes everybody to make data work for a business. So I think there's two angles to that. One is that, the classic data science can't happen without good data engineering, right? There's sort
Yeah.
of a hierarchy of needs in data, and you need those foundational layers upon, for the more kind of business oriented and insights oriented layers to operate upon. And then the converse is also true, right? If you just have a ton of data engineers, but you don't have good business analytics happening that takes advantage of that good data engineering, then, what's it for, right? So everything requires everything else. So having a well-rounded and fully staffed team is important if you're actually going to take data seriously at a business that became as big as WeWork did.
Gotcha. And to kind of build up on that, you've worked at various different organizations over the last 10 years. Which team or who would you say helped you grow the most, and why?
That's a great question, in part because that answer is always going to change. I feel like I'm constantly learning and growing more. If I'm not trying to do that, then I'm fooling myself. But if I had to answer it, I would say DOS 42. So shout out to my friends over at DOS 42. They're a boutique data and analytics consulting firm, and they're actually the team I joined after my time at WeWork, because their CEO and founder, Nick Amabile, was just basically starting out he was creating full stack analytics, which then through a series of events became DOS 42. But he asked me to join in those early days, kind of like first 6, 7, maybe 8 people, and grow into something meaningful. And I just learned so much, not just about data, because, obviously in a consulting role, you're seeing lots of different problems and solutions and meeting and learning from lots of different people on the client side and in partners all around, but also just in terms of how to be an effective professional, right? Like I definitely built my data engineering chops there, but I also built my consulting chops there in my just sort of like professional, like process and efficiency type stuff. Like, how do I work well with others? What are my strengths and weaknesses around collaboration? That was so critical at DOS 42. So I really value that experience. My time there was extremely, extremely impactful.
That's really interesting to hear. I mean, like, I think when you start on your first job, you kind of getting to know the tools, but then as you kind of progress in your job, it's also how you conduct yourself in a professional context, right? And I think tools come plus how you run as a business. I think those are like very invaluable as you kind of grow in your career.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. And that type of environment was a great place to find that balance and remember that there are a lot of important things to, to being an effective data practitioner and data professional, other than just, oh, how's your this technical skill or that technical skill.
And Erik, I have a couple more questions about WeWork. So the first one, obviously at WeWork, you had a really solid understanding of the business. You were looking at the numbers every day. Were there any significant data points or insights that you recognized time and time again that the rest of the organization might have ignored?
Yeah, sort of like canaries in the coal mine kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure. I wouldn't say necessarily in the data itself, because we had a very strict partition between financial data and other data. And I was firmly in the other data function. So I actually had basically no insight into just how lopsided the financials were, which was by far, the most the most worrying and obvious and direct way to see that the business was unsustainable. So the short answer is no, but in that same respect, the close kind of guarded way in which the financial data was held in and of itself may have been a flag in retrospect. So probably not the juicy answer you were looking for, but yeah, probably something that doesn't get talked about a lot publicly. Like very few people within the company, even on the data team, as I was, had full visibility into our trajectory to burning piles of cash.
Yeah, I've been in that situation a few companies ago where as the analyst, I had full access to all the financials. And like it wasn't a WeWork situation, but over the course of, a year, I understood what things weren't generating revenue and like big campaigns that people thought were successful that actually weren't attributing to revenue. So it's a very peculiar situation, especially as an analyst, because you don't have much power in the organization to sway minds, at least at that stage of my career. And
Yeah.
another question about WeWork. So I just think it's really interesting when, you're at a company that you think is the pinnacle of success and then it's not. And you were, in like employee number 200 or something. So I'm assuming that during your 3-year period, you were thinking, oh my gosh, this is my golden egg. Like I might be able to retire on this money. Or was it not that exciting to you?
Oh no, it was very, very exciting. But I think I always had a pretty healthy amount of skepticism as to the financial upside for myself, because I don't know, that's just in my nature, I suppose. But I never thought it was the kind of thing. Sure, I hoped, but I never thought it was a sure thing that, okay, we're going to have some giant exit where I'll get some totally unearned payout.
Yeah.
Because, I knew I was a very small part of a very big picture. And so I never really had those expectations per se. Well, to your point, where I did start to get like excited in some respects, it's just like, it was wild, the growth. They
Uh-huh.
did. I didn't have access to financial data, but I did have access to our other data. And I was privy to the news, obviously, about our fundraising and stuff like that. So between just looking at how many more people were becoming members, how many locations we were opening, things like that in the data, but then also knowing that, like, also sitting there while like Jamie Dimon walks by and sits with Adam and they have a 5-minute chat, and then they ring a gong and then they do tequila shots. And then he comes out and says, we just closed a $300 million credit facility or something like that. Like that made me think, okay, I don't know why this is special, but it must be, right?
Yeah.
But besides that, I don't think I ever really took anything for granted there, which is good.
Well, it was a pretty awesome way to start your career, regardless.
Yeah, it was fun. And I made a lot of good, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the awesome friends and mentors that I encountered there. If any of those people hear this, they'll know who they are. But a lot of people I met there made a really positive impact on me and my life. So shout out to the WeWork friends.
Shout out to WeWork. And Kalstoff and I, we often talk about analytics engineering and the future of analytics engineering. Obviously, you have a ton of experience in that field. And I'm wondering, do you think that title will exist in 5 years, or do you think it'll simply be absorbed in an already existing title?
Yeah, this question gets asked a lot. And I honestly am not entirely sure why, other than the fact that it's just sort of interesting. Like, what is this title? It's probably less than 5 years old, right? Will it exist in 5 years or not? I don't know. I don't really think it terribly matters. It's the sort of thing where I guess I think it will, just because it's prevalent enough where it'd be kind of weird if you didn't really see it around still in 5 years. Something drastic would have to happen. But I guess more interesting to me is just like, why are we having the conversation? Like titles and, it's all semantics and stuff. And I do think like nomenclature is important. It'd be kind of weird if I was in data and I didn't. But at the end of the day, with that kind of stuff, it's like, as long as everybody in your business has a common understanding of what it is you do and what value you provide, then who cares what you're called? So data engineer is a good example of one that the classic definition of that is squishy inherently, but it's also changing because of the tools and technologies and methodologies that people use to get that job done, right? With the rise of, the Fivetrans and Stitches and Airbytes and, extra of the world, some workloads that may have been more bespoke and in the data engineers world of work are now still in their world, but just done so differently. So maybe they have more time to also sort of be a BI analyst, but also sort of be an analytics engineer and so on and so forth. So I think it's fine. I think analytics engineer can sometimes be a good way to describe the value somebody provides, but I think people get wrapped up in its relationship with DBT and things like that, which obviously is strong and clear because it really came from them. But yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't exist in 5 years. And just whatever works to make people understand what it is you do in a business, it's fine by me.
Yeah, we see that a lot of times in people getting caught up in titles, and they forget what was the main objective that, or what is the main business problem they wanted to solve. And this is particularly prevalent, seen like in software engineering, in data engineering, data analysis. BI is like so many granular different titles that come up, and you almost like lose sight of the original problem that you set out to solve. So in that regard, let's say if someone is wanting to start their career out as a data analyst, or as a data professional, let's say as a generalized term, what would you advise them to kind of focus on as like their first 1 year, what they should be doing?
Someone just getting started in data.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I do talk to a lot of folks who are either just getting started in their careers in general or looking to kind of pivot into data from, some other career, usually something kind of close by. So yeah, I give this a lot of thought, and I'm not sure. I think from a technical kind of take on it, like SQL is still the most important and fundamental thing you need to know and learn in data. And a lot of times it's taken for granted because it's like, well, it's not hard. It's so simple and so easy. And it's like, that's true. But you can see big differences in people's effectiveness with it when you test their rigor on it. So that's one technical test I always give if I'm hiring, because it's like, two people can on paper know SQL at the same level, but you can see a huge difference in how effective they are at problem solving through it when you actually give them like a live test or something. So SQL is still the first most important thing. Then it's nice to see other like exposure to tools and technologies that are relevant to the ones your business uses, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of what you do can be learned on the job when you're first starting out. So make sure you have SQL, but then also understand cloud technology, like to some extent, right? So one sort of certification or test that I think is like a good way to kind of understand how, especially modern data stack technologies work, is like go get a Snowflake core certification, because then you'll understand that like, all right, there are different cloud services involved in this cool tool that we call Snowflake, or honestly, there are other similar certifications you can get that teach you the same things. But Snowflake's good because obviously it's prevalent in our space as the cloud data warehouse itself. But also I took that a long time ago, but I just remember them doing a good job of explaining the cloud services involved in Snowflake's architecture. And that's really helpful if you're just getting started and you're wondering like where these things are connecting, what's happening back there, and like where the data is actually living and moving. So those are my first couple of recommendations, I guess, more from a technical standpoint.
That's pretty interesting what you mentioned about the cloud architecture, because a lot of times people just straight out of university coming into a professional setting, not having a good appreciation of, okay, what are all the cloud architecture? What do you mean by a Google Cloud function? What do you mean by a Lambda? What do you mean by compute and storage in the most basic levels? Having that understanding, it's super important, at least in as a foundational layer, because most of the stuff happens in the cloud these days, right?
And I think I already know what your answer is going to be to this question. You're going to say this is just semantics. Who cares? I think you're right, but I'm still going to ask. So the modern data stack has been getting a lot of heat lately. A lot of people think it's too expensive. Others think it's too much to manage, and others might say it's simply outdated. What is your take on the modern data stack right now?
It's funny. It's sort of like asking me, how do I like living on planet Earth or something? Because my career has been basically centered in and around the modern data stack. So it's almost like I don't know anything different. So I'm not really sure how to, like, there's no, I don't have a good perspective on like, well, the modern data stack is better than or worse than X because I don't even know what X is. That's kind of my,
Yeah,
my
that's
attempt
my
at being
experience too.
self-aware. Right. So, but taking a crack at it anyway. Yeah, like you said, semantics, whatever. Like, what even is the modern data stack? But I think in general, though, when it's become, unless you're thinking about the more business side of things, like like when companies were founded and things like that, I think one of the technical themes of the modern data stack is that it's like data warehouse centric, right? A lot of what is typically referred to as the modern data stack is the kind of composable suite of data technologies that put particular emphasis on the power of modern cloud data warehouses. So I think back in, I don't know, whatever, 2015 or something, that like Looker is, on the rise and stuff. Looker, like other BI tools and platforms, put emphasis and is sort of predicated on the power of modern cloud data warehouses. Like you running Looker without a powerful underlying cloud data warehouse wouldn't really make sense. And then the same thing on the other end where you have Fivetran, it's like, okay, we can sort of reduce this problem to extract and load and rely on, again, a powerful cloud data warehouse to do the transform. So that's kind of my view on it. And I don't see, like, I'm not part of any camp on like it's dying or whatever, or it's still the best. Like I just use whatever I think is the best thing for the job every day. And I'm always trying to find new things that are better. So for now, yeah, I am definitely, if I'm called to solve a problem or help a company, basically stand up a data stack, I'm going to be using modern data stack tools like 9 times out of 10. I don't even know when I wouldn't. So yeah, there's a reason there's a lot of people excited about and working in kind of the modern data stack community. I get the sense you're going to ask about cost too, though.
No, really, just my takeaway from a few of your answers is just, oh yeah, like he's a reasonable, smart person. Like when I'm saying, ooh, what do you think about this title, analytics engineering, or what do you think about the modern data stack? Just like, who cares what it's called? Just find what works and use what works. And I think that's the only right answer.
That's exactly how I feel. And I mean, I'm going to ask myself the question anyway, but like one of the other common gripes I've heard about the modern data stack is, isn't there a cheaper way to do this? And my answer to that is you can ask that of any stack you decide to work in. So you just always need to be diligent about cost and the ROI of your investment in your data team and data stack, regardless of what it is. So like, yeah, sure, there's cheaper ways to do certain things, but you can cross those bridges when you get there. For example, like looking at the cloud data warehouse itself, like looking at Snowflake, you can do the same thing cheaply or expensively. And a lot of the time it's really easy to bring costs down. I'm rarely active on like LinkedIn and other places, but when I have been, it's been to share things that my team thought was cool around cost savings in Snowflake, because a lot of the time there's such low hanging fruit. So being on top of it is like at least half the battle. And then with the other things, for example, yeah, after a certain scale, like Fivetran is going to get expensive, but it got you started, it got you moving, it got your data flowing. And then if you really need to move certain workloads off and look to save money, go for it. Like you'll have afforded yourself the time to figure that out by using it in the first place. So I really just think it ends up being the responsibility of the team managing the stack more than like the stack's fault itself.
100%. I completely agree with you, because I think a lot of time I find people getting kind of fixated on an answer, and that being the one and only answer from the start of a company's evolution till the end of time. But the reality is that the company itself goes through various stages, the data itself goes through various stages, and the tools of the trade needs to evolve as the company evolves and the needs of the company evolves, right? Something that is available on Fivetran today got you started fairly quickly, and at some point, yeah, you need a different solution, but that doesn't mean it makes one wrong and the other right.
That's well put. Yeah, I agree 100%. The ability to evolve and adapt is a huge key. And that might just come from the fact that like it's something I value in my own kind of just attitude on work. Part of that's because like I know I'm a master of none. I know that there's always room for improvement. So that attitude helps you remember like, okay, let's always be looking for ways to improve and not get complacent or get too overly opinionated, like you're saying.
So I mean, like my own Slack title at Paradime is also master of none. So not really good at anything. So great to hear that as well.
Yes, it's a fun thing to be.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, you mentioned that a lot of these tools, the success or failures of these tools are less related to the tool itself and more related to, how you use it, how the team uses it. And that was my experience. Again, a few companies back, I blamed all the failures of me and my data team on Azure. And I was like, oh, we were just using like the wrong data warehouse, wrong CRM and all this stuff. And then I was talking to Matt Housley, the guy that wrote Fundamentals of Data Engineering. And he just honestly told me, he's like, yeah, no, that was a team problem. Azure's a great product if you know how to use it. I think your team was just not doing things well. And I was like, damn it. Like, now what do I blame?
That's so classic, because I think so many more problems are team problems than tech problems. Most of the tech problems are like totally solvable. And I would say most technical problems I've solved over my entire career have probably been solved before. That's why I was able to like Google an answer for it. But like the hardest stuff is, how do I work with the business? How do my data engineers work with my analytics engineers, work with my BI engineers and analysts and so on and so forth. So yeah, that makes a ton of sense to me. Like I had a client a while ago that was on largely like a Microsoft stack, and they had a lot of on premises servers as well. Like one of their core databases was on premises, and they were doing some stuff with data that I've seen plenty of modern data stack shops not be able to achieve. And it's a lot of the time what's the quote from Top Gun? It's the pilot, not the planes, right?
There we go.
Yeah, I think that's a big component. So sometimes this is something I've heard Pedram Navid talk about before, and he actually like held my role at Hightouch before I did, and he's definitely out there, obviously, in kind of our circles, Parker, but and a big voice. But like one thing he's said, I think he said this at the MDS Con, the Fivetran host conference. He said like, we're kind of ahead of our skis a little bit in some respects in this community, because we're talking about these technical solutions to problems that barely exist yet. Like when we start talking about LLMs taking our jobs, it's like, we're so not even close to that. We have so many more fundamental problems, at least on a individual business by business basis. That's not what we need to worry about. What we need to worry about is, hey, can we not reinvent the wheel every time we have to build a board deck? Stuff like that,
Yeah, today I saw an ad that was like, it was for a software in our space that pretty much said, create your own AI analyst. You don't need an analyst. I don't think we're quite there yet. Maybe one day, but I think there's a lot of problems that need to be solved before something like that happens. And it's true for a lot of the modern data stacks going too.
Totally. And it's okay to get excited about some of that cutting edge, like more bleeding edge technology, but its relevance to our vast majority of our jobs is I think low at this stage.
And Kaustav, how quickly are you trying to replace me with some kind of AI tool? Do you got a roadmap for that?
I've got no roadmap for that. You are irreplaceable.
And to close up, Kasta, if you have a couple more questions, you want to ask one of those?
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to get your thoughts on is, what would you say was the most successful data team that you've been part of, and what do you think made it successful?
It's hard to. There's a lot of apples and bananas comparisons when I think back, because I've only been a part of so many organizations, but just in my time at DOS 42 and consulting, that during that time I was a part of like a dozen different data teams. So I'm actually going to pick one of those, and I'm going to say I think it's a tie between Uber and Looker. Uber, because they, like, that was a long time ago, but I have to mention them because they were always actually, like, how do I put this? They were actually there was like business value added every day by the data organization there. That was clear, and they were pushing the envelope there for sure. I think they were doing a lot of stuff that maybe didn't always pan out into business value, but they were trying, and they were investing a lot in data. So, I mean, it just goes without saying that they're a very technology and data-driven organization. But Looker also. So Looker was fun because that was sort of the other end of the spectrum. When I worked there for about a year, it looked nothing like Uber. I was going to their office in Santa Cruz, and I think what was remarkable about them wasn't necessarily what they were doing with technology, because they had a very simple, very modern data stack internally at Looker, and obviously they used Looker, but everything was just clean. I was just impressed with the process and the organization and how people work together. So that was my favorite in terms of, wow, okay, this team actually just like is effective and efficient and has good process and good collaboration.
Yeah, my wife used to work at Uber, so the data team and the data organization were at Uber. They were really pushing the envelope of what's possible in that space at the time.
And even beyond just the data teams there, like the people that I know that have worked at Uber, the average operations employee or marketing employee, like they know how to access the data warehouse and write SQL and do their own legitimate analysis.
Yeah, very data savvy company,
from my experience.
for sure. And obviously, if you can do both, if you can have really technologically heavy hitting work like Uber's, or a very organized and collaborative organization like Looker's, like that's the dream. What was cool about them was they actually pulled off, and granted, I was only there for some time, so there's probably a lot of stuff I didn't know about, but it seemed like they actually pulled off the whole hierarchy of KPIs throughout the org thing, where like, the CEO has things that they want to see, and like the next kind of rundown of leaders, their KPIs have to relate to and roll up to whatever the North Star is for the CEO, and so on and so forth, trickling down the org. So that actually they actually tried and did that, which was refreshing, as opposed to, hey, anybody ask everything and we're all moving in different directions.
Awesome. Well, Erik, we stole more time than we had planned, so we really appreciate you giving us a ton of your time.
Yeah, of
And
course.
we hope to talk to you soon, work with you in some way soon. So great to meet you again.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. And yeah, we'll definitely get to talk soon, I'm sure, Parker. Great to meet you too, Costa.
Lovely to meet you, Erik, and hope to work with you soon. Thanks a lot for making time for us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
See you, Erik.
See ya.
Awesome. Kostov, what was your big takeaway from that one?
I think a couple of them. I think number one is that there is no right stack, there is no wrong stack, and it's people getting caught up in what is right, what is wrong, and kind of getting very opinionated and passionate about a stack and a set of tools is very limiting, in my opinion. I think, and seeing Erik also agree with that, because that is quite reassuring, because every company goes through a journey, goes through an evolution and step jumps. And as you make those jumps and as you evolve, the kind of problem you need to solve also evolves. As a result, the tools you need to solve that problem also evolves. You might start with a hammer, and at some point you need a driller, and that doesn't mean a hammer loses its use and an electric drill has to be used all the time.
Yeah, my takeaway was similar in that when I talk to people like Erik, when I talk to smart people like Erik, the way they answer questions is very much so like I would ask a stupid question like, "Ooh, what do you think about, this title, this category in our industry?" And they just say, like who really cares? Just are you solving the problem that needs to be solved? If you aren't, solve it. If you are, great. Who cares? I'm like, oh, that's refreshing. Okay. I need to, go to the other side of the pendulum more and make sure that I'm focused on what actually is work. What should I be focused on?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's so easy to lose focus and lose track and kind of get caught up in so many different tools and things like that, or your day-to-day job just becomes, hey, can you answer this question, can you provide this report? And it's so easy to lose track that it's imperative that you organize yourself. When I was at Revolut, I put a question in, a mandatory question that somebody has to answer before they decide to make any data requests to my product analytics team, is that they have to write at least 200 words on what is the cost of not doing this. And asking for something is easy, but when you have to justify what is going to happen if I didn't do that, makes people think and makes people ask only for things that matter. And that
Yeah,
means that
that's
the
a
team,
great practice.
and then what happens is that the team that works on it only works on things that matter, because you can very easily quantify and qualify. I worked on these 5 things, and if I didn't work on it, these are the 5 things that would not have happened.
And also from the stakeholder perspective, when you force them to really write out what they want and the outcomes or the opportunity costs of not doing it, that helps them understand that their initial request probably wasn't what they wanted anyways. They
Exactly.
were asking something and then they realized, oh, you know what? Actually, there's a bigger picture here that we need to look at. Or actually, we don't really need to analyze anything at all right now. Thank you. Have a good day.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great. Well, I think we can end it on that. That was a super fun one.
That was a really interesting one. It was super fun. Super fun. Really good one.
Great. I'll see you next week with our mystery guest to be determined.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Take care, man. See ya.
See ya.